Welcome, everyone. This is Bob Giberson. I'm the owner of PeakLogix here in Midlothian, Virginia. Today's webinar is a little different as we kick off our partnership segment. We have a wide network of trusted partners, and we want to extend their knowledge and expertise to our clients. So we've asked Rick Collins from Platinum Circle Partners to join us to share his expertise in how you gain control and reduce your transportation expenses. During the presentation, you may have some questions for Rick as he walks through his strategies and recommendations. I ask that you submit them through the chat feature on the webinar, sending them to the organizer only, and we'll address them at the end of Rick's presentation in the Q&A session. So with that, please welcome Rick Collins.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks a lot for the opportunity to talk to some of your clients and those who might be interested in learning a little bit more about what's going on in the transportation marketplace in today's world. And there are a lot of different areas that we could focus on today, but for the sake of time and everyone's schedule, we're going to make this really centric to small parcel conversation today. So I'm not sure how many actually are, just about everybody on the earth uses some sort of small parcel carrier to meet their transportation needs. So we're going to talk through this, but initially, Bob and everyone here, if I can just give you a little bit of information about our company and our partnership with PeakLogix in the past, and also just a little bit about who we are as a company. But we are actually divided into three divisions, and we'll hit this area fairly quickly. We have Platinum Circle Partners, which is the supply chain consulting group for our group that's headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. We also have Integrated Logistics, which is really our spend management. It's our auditing, contract compliance, and a group that helps and assists clients with their transportation needs from a information perspective, and we have many tools. Our platform is that we have that's extended to over 300 plus clients that we help manage their transportation costs with a central focus on small parcel. The last part, these are all sister companies, Platinum Circle Technologies, where we help with integration for our clients in a variety of different areas, and including software development and, as you see, different architecture and deployment. So there's three different groups that represent and reflect our company as a whole. We were founded in '98, and we'll go through this fairly quickly. We manage over $3 billion, help our clients through audit and contract compliance each year. And really over 900 million transactions are processed. We have a pretty darn cross-functional team with experience from the UPS and the carriers in our background, and myself included 22 years at UPS, and also with UPS Freight, which was overnight when I was there, and had about a 7-state region of sales and a sales team. We certainly have a number of Fortune 50 and 100 and 500 clients that we work with, and so just gives you a little bit of a snapshot, 30,000-foot view of who we are. So today, for the purposes of our webinar, we're going to talk about a small parcel marketplace overview, really insight into the market from a cost and pricing perspective, and we're going to give you some strategies and hopefully something you can take away today to go back and maybe have the conversations. And we have, I know from the audience, there could be a client to spend several $100,000 annually, to clients that may spend tens of millions of dollars in small parcel cost. I'm going to also touch base real briefly on the 2017 carrier rate increases, which have been recently announced from both UPS and FedEx. Both of them are announced a 4.9% increase for their ground services for both commercial and residential, but you'll see one slide I'll share with you where those costs can certainly be much greater than the 4.9 that they announced. And certainly there's significant changes in some of the accessorials, and we'll touch base with that. And then we'll leave a few minutes for questions at the end that through the chat line that Bob alluded to earlier. As far as trends in 2016 and 17, again, the U.S. small package marketplace will continue to be dominated by UPS and FedEx, and that's not to leave a third viable option for many of our clients, which is the USPS, especially through their first class and priority mail, which has become a more robust service for many of our clients. And for some of you probably know this, that FedEx carries the priority mail, and that's the reason that it's a really excellent service from 2 to 3 days anywhere in the country. So it certainly is, they're really, even though they're dominated by UPS, the market is small parcel, UPS and FedEx. The USPS certainly has a play in this. And as the GDP continues with slow growth, we see that a portion of this, both carriers are really focusing more on their international and non-U.S. And there's not a tremendous amount of growth that you'll see in the small parcel section. You could certainly hear and learn more about how the Wall Street views both of these two carriers from a financial perspective, but both of them still, because of the slow growth, which will bridge us into the rate increase that's going to be happening, but most of them are focusing from a growth perspective internationally. As I alluded to earlier, there'll be significant changes in the parcel rates going in 2017 that will continue to see significant increases. We're also seeing many of our clients, as probably stating the obvious to most in this audience, where e-commerce continues to escalate. The retail, as far as some of our major retail companies that we support, will have, again, marginal growth in the B2B, but you'll see certainly in the direct consumer market, there's tremendous growth there. And it continues to be, from a strategic side, where the carriers are putting their focus as well. FedEx made some announcements, and we'll talk about this, about the rate increase, but certainly this is a pretty significant move that they're going to be calculating on a biweekly basis and a 2-week lag period from a monthly basis, which really it's an interesting piece that FedEx has done with this. And again, I'll try to touch base on this if we have time in the end. As I alluded to earlier, e-commerce continues to be the biggest growth for any of the small parcel carriers. And going into your peak season, this becomes a real interesting place where you continue to see the carriers, because of operating costs and because of the influx of fourth quarter revenues and volume, becomes real challenging. For some of our largest clients, the carriers are really trying to get forecasting information so as not to even put them at risk because of having to purchase additional equipment and during peak times of the year, and even from a labor perspective. One area that I will touch base with that seems to be growing, probably the most attended session of any conference that you'll see, and that's alternatives to both UPS and FedEx, and that's the growth of regional carriers like OnTrack and Eastern Connection, even in the courier perspective. And I think that all of us could probably recognize the Amazon impact of what's happened in the marketplace. Even for myself, I live in a concentrated golf community neighborhood with about 700 homes. That's not uncommon now for me to see the USPS delivering on Sundays, as you continue to see regional carriers and also USPS growth because of the Amazon effect of having something delivered to you even as quick as next day. I had a partner of mine who needed, just kind of case in point, that needed a charger for his laptop for a road trip he was going on, and he ordered it at 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, and by 6 p.m. it was delivered. So and for really a pretty nominal fee because of the Amazon DCs that are located so very near where he was in Atlanta, he was able to get same day service at a really affordable cost. So we see the expectations and even the Amazon effect for the trend that's happening. Most clients want it yesterday, and which is really dictating various modes of trying to get time in transit to a much more expeditious fashion, and the expectations that I order something and I'll have it tomorrow, or in this case, as I just shared with you today. So let me talk to you a few minutes as we bridge this into talking about sourcing and small parcel sourcing opportunities that you may have at your individual company, and how do you prepare for that. Again, some of you may have gone through this recently through an RFP process or through just negotiating your contracts. And in terms of the small parcel, just to kind of give you a foundation piece, most carrier agreements today, and they're called agreements, not necessarily contracts, are 36 months in length. And because of that, there certainly is a tendency for the carriers to have expectations. They price it based on you making a commitment to partner with them for a period of time. So when you're looking at when you first start the RFP process, or you're thinking through how do I negotiate my rates, there certainly is an analytic and a contract assessment that needs to take place. And so in really understanding your current rates that you have, the terms and conditions of the contract, and how's it structured. So there's really a kind of a three-step process that we recommend every client, or we assist our clients to go through. So you have to have the ability to analyze what you currently have and assess where you are today. The second point is really the measurement of those contracts, and from a data management side, do you have the package level, and that's what that PL is, level measurement. Do you have that package level detail where you can really understand what your cost per unit is? So you can, in today's world, there's over 100 surcharges with the carriers. So do you really truly understand what your net cost per unit is for moving a package from A to B? In many scenarios, you have to really model, see what's the impact, and again, that's what we're taking our clients through. We'll be helping our clients understand even what this new rate increase that impact might be from a scenario modeling perspective. So, and you have to understand what services you're using, whether it's ground or next day, or a 2-day scenario, or even some of the carriers' alternative solutions, whether it's the UPS SurePost and FedEx SmartPost, where they're using the USPS for that final mile delivery. So expectations from a measurement side or on time in transit, you have to have the ability to look at this, assess it, and then measure it. And of course, understanding what's going on in the marketplace, understanding carrier pricing trends, understanding what's your past negotiation success been with the carriers. When you go back and look, maybe it was a predecessor before you may have had the opportunity now to go through a sourcing event with a UPS or a FedEx. So what was the negotiation success from the past, and then say, where do we need to go from here? And then you look at key market cost advantages for both you and your assessment internally as a company of what kind of cost saving goals are you looking for as a company based on your current transportation spend. So let's kind of break this down a little bit further for a contract assessment and rate management. Again, it's really activity based, so you have to be able to look at the cost components to really understand what your true net cost is per unit and how that's structured. You have to understand where are your distribution centers located, and where more importantly, where are your customers located. It's really interesting to, even in today's world, that still 76% of the U.S. population is on the East Coast. So that's why even in Virginia, where Bob is, and where I'm currently in Richmond, Virginia, you certainly can see that there are major distribution centers here for a reason, because you can reach 76% of the population typically in 2 days by a ground service. So, but where are your distribution centers located? And then what's the impact of your time in transit based on customer expectations? And then there's some, in the third bullet point there, industry strategies, whether the carriers at some point from a marketplace will fine-tune their strategies even with the financial sector or the pharmaceuticals, the retail sector or e-commerce, really understanding what that strategy is even with the carriers. You'll see sometimes they'll communicate that to you, sometimes you'll have it through periodicals you can read, or even talking through the current marketplace with consulting groups like us. And then what are the other opportunities that you might be able to leverage, even if you're doing a sourcing event for a small parcel? Both UPS and FedEx have UPS freight and freight sides of their business for the LTL side. Is there something that you can leverage together to help you during this contract assessment? How much are you spending your LTL? Is this an opportunity for both of UPS and FedEx freight to be a part of a bundled approach to your small parcel needs? And of course, the margins internationally are different than the U.S., and we won't spend a lot of time here on this particular subject just for the sake of time. So here's the conventional wisdom, and this is probably not anything earth-shattering for anyone, but the person with the most information during a contract negotiation certainly is in a better position to negotiate. So the questions that we have posed here on what critical information is needed for a successful parcel negotiation, and how to ensure that information is really accurate from the start. And then the final, most important question is for yourself to answer in your company is, what's our cost saving goals, and what should they be based on our current shipping characteristics in the marketplace? Let's kind of look at the nature of how this stacks up when you're in negotiation with the small parcel carriers. And as you can see on the left-hand side in this kind of card game scenario, the carrier holds most of the cards. It's very unlikely, and again, the carriers are not evil at all. They're in business to make money, but they certainly have the ability, because of their ability to have data and understand the structure of your contract. They hold the cards, and they're not going to voluntarily typically give you information based on that critical information on your cost. I think if we took a poll today, how many of your carriers actually give you lots of information from a reporting side? It's probably very small, if any. You have to request that information from the carriers, and sometimes it's very painful for them to have to give that information up. Again, you see the carrier that creates their own context for the numbers and reports, and they control the timeline, and then they certainly have barriers and that could be, and this is one thing that I'll talk about even from an integration side or a systems perspective. You know, as you're tied into their systems a little bit more, it makes it a little more difficult to break away from those carriers from a switching barrier. And there's a strategy behind that from their positioning, but in the same token, they hold the cards on that particular piece. So you look at the last bullet point where they maintain control of the rates. I mean, no one on this call, or nor myself, had any idea of what this 2017 rate increase would be. And this is the interesting dilemma or question that you have when you enter into, let's say, a 36-month agreement that you're trying to partner with in a carrier, and each year they raise those rates in January, and this year for UPS it's December. So when they do that in the middle of a contract, we ask the question, what has changed and what has significantly changed that might impact that partnership agreement that you agreed to for a 36-month period? And in many cases, it is at that point when you say, well, let's hold on just for a second, because when we agreed in this partnership agreement, these were the terms that we had in place. And now the game has changed. So it's the best analogy I can give you. It's like changing the number of outs in a baseball game in the seventh inning. Say, well, now there's going to be 6 outs. So in that respect, the carrier, you have the customer has no understanding of what the ongoing rate issues are and what that impact is on their bottom line of their company. And I could give you one key example. I had when the carriers changed the DIM structure the last couple of years for one of my clients. It ended up being that one surcharge change. It was a DIM change that would happen with their large packages. That one surcharge change resulted in a $1 million increase in their bottom line budgets. So without having the ability going back to be able to assess where you are and what the impact is, you're really going to be at a disadvantage when you get into negotiations. As you can see on the customer side, you really are at a disadvantage. The definitions have been defined by the carrier. There's a misunderstanding of the competitive options that you may have and maybe there's just an absence of really having data to really assess this at your company and have an understanding of what your true costs are for moving a package from A to B. So kind of just to give you an idea, and again, both carriers have published rates. You'll see an example here that they have service guides where they produce published rates, and those published rates, your discounts are based upon what those published rates are. So it's an adjustment from those published rates. So as the rates go up, of course, so do your rates. And so everything's when someone would tell me at times, well, I get a 50% off of discount, I would say 50% off of what? In this case, both carriers have published rates that they work on discount programs, and so their incentives are based upon those things. So just like the surcharges, each year they'll go up incrementally, and so you have to really have an understanding of what that net impact is going to be for you on your bottom line during the negotiation process, or even if you're not in a formal negotiation, what's that cost impact going to be for us as a company, so that when we are actually working with our budgets, what can we forecast to be this year, for 2017? So let's go on to the contract structure and how it affects your rates. It's all based on a rate structure of weight and distance. How much does it cost to move a package from A to B through particular and specific zones? And then there's a revenue component of that based on the weight and distance of the contract. And so you have both a weight and distance for the base rate structure, and then there's a revenue component that also is a tiered structure that gives you the weight and distance, that it's a calculation. And then finally, there's accessorials. As I mentioned earlier, the surcharges, there's over 100 of them. And typically, it might represent any client's 15%, up to 15, maybe even 20% of your weekly UPS or FedEx bill can be comprised of just surcharges alone. And so these surcharges can be applied depending upon the carrier. For UPS, most of the charges happen at the point of where that package is manifested. For FedEx, it's at the point of delivery. So you may not even know when you ship that package, or maybe you invoice your client until that package goes through its cycle, and there may be an additional charge on the back end for that particular shipment. So the question we have for our clients is, do you truly know your landed cost from the point that package is shipped to when it's delivered? And there's all sorts of things that can happen in the middle of this, whether it's a weight and piece correction, or it's a dimensional adjustment on that package, or it could be a commercial package that went out of commercial but was delivered a residential, or vice versa, where that package could have been shipped out as an $8 package, and when it comes back it could be $9.25 based on the additional accessorials that may be assessed during the movement of that package. This contract structure, and this is kind of a snapshot view, and just for the sake of this call, this is a lot of detail, but this is the structure of what a UPS or a FedEx contract would look like. And again, this is not anyone's real contract, so I want to state that clearly, that it's just kind of an example for what it would look like. So as you can see on the top left-hand corner, there are base discounts that you would have based on specific zones 2 through 8. So if you're in Virginia, a Zone 2 package would be a package that would be delivered the next day by ground, and then going to, let's say, San Diego, which would maybe a Zone 8, or a Portland, Oregon, which would be a Zone 8 package. So there's base rates there, and then you'll see a revenue based. If you see the middle of this particular slide, you'll see a 0 to 46,999 per week. And these are 52-week rolling average revenue gross numbers, not net numbers, but gross numbers. And so the carrier looks at this from a gross perspective. So if for any reason, and that's one thing about the contracts that I will tell you about, they're both base rate and revenue based. And if they build these contracts so that you don't cherry pick the contracts, and maybe you're trying to split your business between multiple carriers. Well, in this case, most contracts are built based upon a commitment that you have made to the carrier that you're going to ship X amount of packages or a certain dollar amount of revenue. And if for some reason you fall off of that, for whether it's a diversion of packages, or maybe you had a difficult year, and maybe there's some reasons why that your volume is down, and you might be able to have UPS or FedEx work with you when that happens. But most of these contracts are really designed to keep you from having to diverting business to another carrier, even if it's a USPS where that business would go. So there's some punitive language in some of these contracts, the way they're structured. So you have to pay careful attention to these when you are negotiating your contracts. This gives you another quick snapshot in the revenue tier, the weekly transportation charges and their bands. So for an example, if your weekly revenues are between $18,980 to $27,684 for that top UPS next day 100-weight, you see your discount would be 37%. So incrementally, as your revenues grow, so does your UPS discounts or FedEx discounts accordingly. One thing that I will just, I guess, encourage you to look at in your contracts, just as piece, they're I guess more popular than ever. The carriers will introduce some punitive language into your contracts, just again from a protection side. In this competitive marketplace, from both the UPS and FedEx, again, when you enter into a long-term agreement of a 36-month period, there's some teeth in the language that says if you leave us for some reason, there could be a percentage penalty. And this has been a new introduction of terms in the last few years that's been part of it. And you can see the variations in language as I've listed below, that you can see some triggers that if you issue an RFP within the 30 days of contract expiration, if you drop below your minimum revenue performance, it could be a trigger that there's some penalty language. And of course, if you terminate the agreement prior to the expiration of the originally signed agreement, then there could be some punitive revenue results from that. So my encouragement here is just to absolutely look at your contracts in its entirety, especially if you're considering an RFP, or if you've been given a mandate to go out and source your small parcel expenses, then you may want to take a look at it and see what type of penalty language before you start that process. I've showed this slide here just for one reason, and that is there's a cost line, a baseline versus the proposal. You have to be able to measure this, and this is a very detailed slide you see at the top, it's just kind of a FedEx baseline, and then on the right-hand top is a FedEx proposal on the right-hand side. And the only reason I'm showing you this is that there is some complexity of being able to analyze the details of a new proposal coming in. If someone just wouldn't take the word of the carrier always to say, hey, we've saved you an additional 4 or 5%, and here's the new contract, and you ink it without doing some type of analytics. So there is a method to go in and look at every individual service and every surcharge, because it's depending on what revenues you have, there can be one surcharge that doesn't, if the carrier gives you discounts in this place and they don't give it to you in another place, you may not have the focus of where you need to have the contract's negotiation points. And so when you go through this exercise, you have to have the ability to look at the individual services that the carriers offer and to be able to assess what this new proposal means to you, which means that you have to have the ability to analyze this to really understand the true net impact for your respective company. Let me switch gears a minute and just talk about the 2016-2017 rate increases. This is an example, and we have this also for FedEx in every service, but I just pulled out the domestic ground for this year that I wanted you to take a look at. And the case in point is this, is that the carrier announces a 4.9% increase on their ground services. And so when you look at this particular chart, this is for the 2017, you can clearly see that if your packages, where most of America's packages fall, which will be under 10 pounds, you'll see that 4.9 is not exactly 4.9. You can see that in the low zones and even through the higher zones, you'll see that they're significantly higher. Even you might say, well, that's a 0.6%, but depending on the size of your company and depending on where your packages are, you would certainly see a greater impact than that 4.9%. So just if you're doing budgets, don't just take what the general announcement is from the carriers and apply that to your respective company for your budgets for 2017. You really need to go through the due diligence process of saying, hey, what is my average weight, and what are the average zones that we ship to, and what is the implication of this rate increase on my bottom line transportation cost. And when you go through this exercise, you can see that there's a method, and we have the same type of chart for FedEx and for every service, whether it's next day or second day or even international to some extent. You can see the true impact that could be for your company. In this case, you can see the average down at the bottom overall. You see that ground average is 4.9, but where most likely everyone's packages are, it's higher than the 4.9. So this is really an information piece. One thing that did happen this year that I'll hit briefly is that UPS moved up the effective date to the day after Christmas, December 26th. It seems like it moves up earlier each and every year. FedEx announced their increase, and I don't have a slide that addresses this, but I will tell you that one huge impact item that FedEx introduced that for 2017 that really caught everybody by surprise, and they changed the dimensional factor. And this is a huge deal for the industry, and this is a huge deal for you as a customer. The standard divisor is 166, and they reduced that to 139. Well, it means ultimately millions of dollars for the carriers in this area. And so when you're looking at your corrugation, when you're looking at going into 2017, there's certainly going to be a need to look at what this dim factor change, or this divisor, based on the corrugation and the dimensions of your package, what that impact is going to be for you in 2017. UPS has not followed suit yet with this because they announced their rate increase earlier. So I'm sure they are trying to make a decision on what that will look like in the future since FedEx made this bold move of a change. So this is certainly something that I would encourage each of you who are on today to see what this net impact will be for your company, and especially those who are FedEx users. So in summary, kind of the winning strategies and impacts, you really need to know how the carriers, when I say the word behave, what's their positioning, what's your relationship been with UPS and FedEx, and really what's your relationship been with the USPS as another alternative, or some of the regional carriers. Really understand the most critical thing that you could do as a company, and hopefully Bob and some of your customers can see this, there's a power in information. To be in a position of negotiation, you have to have the data, and you have to be able to assess where you are to accurately know what are the potential opportunities for your company. Just like I shared with you on the DIM changes, what's that impact going to be for our company in 2017 if indeed that divisor changes? So you have to have the data to really, in essence, have a report card on how well and how do you stack up based on what the changes are coming down for your company, and really to help you in the end with your budgets for 2017 and how you really plan for your transportation cost. So, and that really puts you in a position understanding what leverage points. If you've got a key surcharge area that you've been hit with, that'll certainly be a key thing that you'll have to lay out in strategies for your customers. Become educated about regional other options besides UPS and FedEx. Again, they're both fantastic carriers. They do a wonderful job in moving packages from A to B, and their technology, they continue to try to make improvements for you from an operations side, from an information side, and really from giving you immediate feedback on when that package is picked up and when it's delivered. There's a lot of wonderful things that they can provide for you in that area. But also there's some regional carriers that give you options from a cost perspective that I do believe can help you in many ways. Let me just hit this last bullet point here and talk about the coaching and knowledge transfer. When you're talking through this, it's real important that the carriers get an understanding of that you have other people involved in this process, whether it's your C-level people or suite people in your company during the negotiation process, that they're involved, your CFO. It's really important that you get other people involved in the organization when you're positioning this with the carrier so that they know, and really telling them a storyline about where your company is going. It's not just about going and getting I guess an answer, or get someone from your trying to get, I call it a Louisville Slugger bat, and trying to get the carriers to respond to you with it's just not necessary. But really from an information side and from a data side, how important it is to really understand the role, your role in strategically positioning your storyline as your company as you grow. And even if you flatline, you're not growing. How do I draft these contracts to make them competitive for the future? Okay, that wraps it up from my side. I'd like to talk about just a second on audit, just for a second on this particular piece, and if we can talk to audit and how important it is. It's any of the organizations, any of the companies that are on today's call. It's really important talking about the data and how important it is to be able to assess where you are. There are groups, we certainly have this capability, but it's really important to get contract performance auditing, really to help you from whether it's allocation of your costs, from a financial perspective, or really just from an audit to find out if indeed you're getting the actual charges that are correct what the carriers are charging you today. Now, I will say this, the carriers make mistakes, but they don't make many mistakes. The most that you can ever expect to get from an auditing perspective is probably 2 to 3% return on an audit side. But there is some wonderful things that you can from a data side, that you can really assess from both a financial, from an engineering, and a customer service. And that old slogan, you can't manage what you can't measure, really comes into play in this particular piece. The last slide here I want to talk about is just, here's an example of a return on investment that you can go with the small parcel carriers. You can look at late shipments. You have to have the ability to manage your lost shipments. There's a lot of areas where you'll see residential adjustments by the carriers, or even damaged shipments. How are we recovering this? So the question I have for each of you is, are you as a company able to capture this information? And if not, you may want to consider looking for a resource outside of your company that could help you in this particular area. There are also engineering opportunities where you may be shipping a lot of air, that you can shift air. You're shipping air right now that could be shipped via ground and still get there in the same time period. There's shipment consolidation. There's address corrections, which are a huge revenue stream for the carriers. So being able to capture data, and that's the reason I'm showing this slide, there are a lot of things that you can get from an opportunity side if you're not measuring those things today. So I really encourage you to take a look at an outside firm, or even someone, or look at this if you don't have the ability to assess data and assess what you currently have in place and how you're working with the carriers on a daily or a weekly basis. Okay, a couple questions that we've had on this, and I'd like to just to pose those to you today. Is when should I negotiate or renegotiate my rates? And I would like to say a couple of quick things. Is that I would really encourage you. The fourth quarter is not the best time, as always. They're going into a peak season, but I can't really say that there's any specific time is a bad time. If you as a consulting group, we would probably recommend not doing it in December, just because you're in the throes of a peak season, or even in November to ramping up. But I would say there's really not a bad time. It's based on your particular needs as a company, and maybe you've had acquisitions, maybe there's been some tremendous growth, and maybe there's just a time where you flatline and you say, boy, we haven't looked at this in a long time, and we really need to renegotiate our rates. I'd really encourage you that at some point that you look at both carriers and not just stay with the same carrier. So when's the last time you've looked at, if you're a UPS carrier, when's the last time you've looked at alternatives, or even a regional carrier solution, or even the USPS? When's the last time you've really had someone present anything to you on those areas? So there's really not a bad time to negotiate your rates. Just wouldn't recommend sometime during a peak season in a calendar year. The million-dollar question we get is, what's the right discount? And again, I would say that the carriers would say there's no package is a bad package if it's priced right. And of course, they kind of laughingly would make that communication to you. But what is the right discount for that package? It really depends on your unique distribution model. Every client is different, depending on where your distribution centers are and where your clients are ultimately. So there's no easy way for me to say that you should get an X amount of this discount based on where you are located in Richmond, Virginia, because there's maybe a variety of things that are involved in this whole process, including the size of your packages, the density, where those packages are going, all the surcharges that are associated. So there's really not what is the right discount for my particular company. So there's definitely for me to tell everyone on this call in a broad brush way on what's the right discount for you. It really is dependent upon your unique package characteristics and the marketplace conditions. Kimberly, Bob, that's all I have right now.
Great.
Any other
Thanks,
questions?
Rich. Yeah, you actually teed up a couple questions I'm sure our audience had nicely, so thank you for including those common questions that you typically receive. We had an additional question. Are you able to provide a very brief generic case study of maybe a client you've helped and the savings they've realized from that service, and as a brief overview of how you did that for them?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that you'll find is, again, every client's different. So we have clients, again, that would spend a few $100,000 a year to clients who spend over $100 million plus, in any, in just an annual small parcel spend. But I guess I could give you a number of recent case studies, but one that comes to mind, I'll just, a client that spends $6 million in parcel, and we were able to, through helping them assess where they were, they had not had any analytics at all in some years. They'd gone through a negotiation about 2.5 years ago. They wanted to go through a process, so they ended up bringing us on board to the system. We went through the process and saved them about 16% on their bottom line. It's really a dangerous number, Kimberly. It's a great question, but we went through the process where we assisted them with the RFP, and throughout that process. And again, the client worked with the carrier directly. We just provided the strategies and the analytics to help them through that process, and then we're able to measure that savings for a period of time that the customer chooses, and so we're able to actually quantify that down to a penny, really, per package. So in light of that, the savings can range anywhere from, on average, from 7 or 8%. If you've got a client that spends, $50 million, you save 7 or 8%. That's certainly a lot of revenue. On top of that, I've saved clients as upward of 25%, depending on when all the conditions. When's the last time they negotiated? Have they taken this, in this quick webinar that we've gone through? Have they taken everything into consideration as far as time in transit, the mode of services that they're using, et cetera? So cost reduction can come in a lot of areas. And again, sometimes that cost reduction can even be that you're using the wrong services and not matching up. But from a negotiation perspective, our experience has been anywhere from 12 to 20% in average savings. So, and if someone is interested, certainly Bob and we could certainly touch base with you and just kind of give you a little bit more information on that in the future. But every sector, I will say this, Kimberly, every sector we're in, so it's not, packages don't know what industry they're in. So we certainly have every, vertical that you can think of, we have clients in. Hope
Great.
That helps.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for clarifying that. And it sounds like with many things within this industry, it really comes back to looking at the data of your particular business and understanding what your goals are, the metrics that you have, and creating a strategy specific to you.
That's correct.